Tonight, somewhere in the world, a family will gather around a body. They will dress it carefully. They will light candles, or place flowers, or say a few final words before the ground closes over it. You have probably done this yourself, or you will. It feels timeless, almost instinctive. But the real answer to where this comes from is far stranger than tradition. It starts not in a funeral home, but in a cave, hundreds of thousands of years before anyone wrote a word down. Your brain treats death differently than almost any other animal's brain does. A dog will sniff a dead packmate and move on. An ant will literally carry a dead nestmate out of the colony like trash. But you stop. You linger. Something in you needs to mark the moment. Where did that need come from? For a long time, scientists assumed it was simple. They thought careful treatment of the dead began with modern humans, maybe 40,000 years ago, right around the time cave paintings and jewelry show up in the archaeological record. Burial seemed like a byproduct of being fully, symbolically human. Clever toolmaking, language, art, and grief all arriving in the same package. Then the evidence got messier, and messier evidence usually means the real story is more interesting. In 1957, an archaeologist named Ralph Selecki was excavating Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq. He was not looking for emotional artifacts. He was looking for stone tools and animal bones, the usual record of survival. Instead, his team uncovered the skeletons of several Neanderthals, some clustered closely together, one curled in a position that looked almost deliberate. Around one skeleton, soil samples later showed unusually high concentrations of flower pollen. Selecki proposed something radical for his time. He suggested Neanderthals, a species long caricatured as brutish and unfeeling, may have laid flowers on their dead. The flower theory has been debated for decades. Some researchers think the pollen came from burrowing rodents, not human hands. But the debate itself reveals something important. The question was never really about flowers. It was about whether a non-human species could feel the pull to mark a death at all. And the bodies themselves, positioned with care, limbs arranged, sometimes in shallow pits, suggested the answer was yes, long before modern humans existed. Why does this matter to you? Because it means the impulse you feel at a funeral is not a recent cultural invention. It is ancient. It may not even be uniquely yours as a member of this particular species. Push the timeline back further, and the story gets even stranger. In 2013, a team led by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger began exploring a nearly inaccessible chamber deep inside the Rising Star Cave system in South Africa. The chamber, nicknamed the Dinaledi Chamber, could only be reached through a vertical chute, barely wide enough for a human body to squeeze through. Inside, Berger's team found the remains of more than a dozen individuals belonging to a previously unknown species, which they named Homo naledi. This species had a brain roughly a third the size of yours, yet the bodies appeared deliberately placed deep within a system, far from any natural entrance, in conditions that ruled out accidental death or predator dragging. Berger's interpretation, still hotly contested among scientists, is that Homo naledi may have intentionally carried their dead into this chamber. If true, it would mean a small-brained, distantly related hominin species was disposing of bodies with intention hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans arrived on the scene. Some researchers push back hard on this conclusion, arguing the evidence isn't conclusive enough to prove intent. But even skeptics agree on one unsettling point. Something pulled these bodies into a place no living animal would crawl into by accident. Here's the question worth sitting with. If a creature with a brain a third the size of yours might have felt that pull, what does that tell you about where this behavior actually comes from? It suggests treating the dead with care is not the finishing touch on being human. It might be one of the oldest threads running through the whole hominin family tree. Archaeologist Paul Pettit, who has spent much of his career studying the origins of burial, frames this shift carefully. In his research on Paleolithic mortuary behavior, he argues that what looks like burial in the earliest cases may not have started as ritual or symbolism at all. It may have started as something far more practical. Removing a decaying body from a living space, protecting the group from scavengers drawn to the smell of death. Simple, functional acts that gradually accumulated meaning over tens of thousands of years. Think about that for a second. The candle on the casket, the eulogy, the headstone with a name carved into it, all of that may have evolved from something as unglamorous as keeping hyenas out of a cave. Meaning doesn't always start as meaning. Sometimes it starts as maintenance and grows a soul over time. By the time you reach the Upper Paleolithic, the practical and the symbolic have fully merged. At a site called Sangir in Russia, dated to roughly 34,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered two children buried head to head, covered in thousands of ivory beads, surrounded by spears made from straightened mammoth tusks. Producing those beads alone would have taken hundreds of hours of skilled labor. Researcher Eric Trinkhaus, who studied the Sangir remains extensively, has pointed out how extraordinary this investment is. An entire community devoting enormous time and resources, not to survival, but to honoring two children who could contribute nothing material in return. That is not maintenance anymore. That is something closer to what you would recognize today as love expressed through ritual. So somewhere between a cave in Iraq, a chamber in South Africa, and a grave in Russia, an instinct to remove the dead quietly transformed into a need to honor them loudly. The thread runs unbroken, just changing shape generation after generation. And here is where it gets personal. You inherited this thread. When you stand at a funeral today, when you feel that strange compulsion to bring flowers, to dress carefully, to say something even when words feel insufficient, you are not performing a custom invented by your grandparents or even by your civilization. You are running a very old piece of software, one that may predate language itself, one that other species on your family tree, species that no longer exist, were already running. Why might this behavior have survived so long across so many different human and near-human species? One theory points to social bonding. Groups that mourn together, that ritualized loss, may have reinforced the social ties that help them survive everything else. Grief, in this view, isn't a glitch in an otherwise efficient survival machine. It's a feature. It binds the group tighter exactly when a death threatens to fracture it. Another theory points to something simpler and stranger: awareness. The moment a species becomes aware enough to recognize its own mortality, death stops being just a biological event and starts becoming a problem the mind has to solve. You can't unknow that you will die. Neither, it seems, could the Neanderthals at Shanidar, or possibly even the small-brained Homo naledi crawling bodies into a hidden chamber. That awareness might be uncomfortable to sit with, but it also means you are part of an extraordinarily long lineage of beings who looked at death and refused to look away from it. Every funeral you have ever attended connects, thread by thread, back to a cave floor scattered with pollen and a narrow chute deep underground in South Africa. You don't think about any of this when you're picking out flowers or writing a eulogy. You're just doing what feels right. But what feels right was shaped over hundreds of thousands of years by hands that were never quite like yours, belonging to minds that were never quite human, all wrestling with the exact same impossible fact you wrestle with now. So tonight, when that family gathers around the body, dressing it carefully, lighting candles, placing flowers before the ground closes over it, know that they are not just honoring one life. They are continuing a ritual older than your species itself and far stranger than tradition ever let on.